Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating medical discussion from Dr. Yoshi's clinic that completely shifts how we understand women's health. We're looking at a huge mystery. Why do some women experience incredibly severe menopausal symptoms while others barely even notice them? It's a puzzle that's frustrated millions, honestly. But today we're going to break down the science, the psychology, and the environment behind it all. So let's just dive right into this crucial question. For decades, the medical community, and really society at large, have treated menopause as this universal, identical experience. But as Dr. Yoshi's insights reveal, it is anything but identical. To really understand this disparity, we've got to look at three distinct pillars that dictate the severity of a woman's experience: her personality, her specific biological hormone decline, and her environmental stressors. But, before we get to those pillars, we actually need to set the record straight on what we're even talking about.
First things first, we have to clear up a major medical misconception by defining menopause itself. So often, we use the word menopause to describe this long decade of symptoms. But strictly speaking, in the medical world, menopause is just a single point in time. It's defined exactly as the moment when a woman has gone precisely 1 year without a menstrual period. That's literally it. It's a milestone marker on a calendar, not a duration.
However, the actual suffering that women report happens during a much wider 10-year window known as the climacteric period. This window spans 5 years before that 1 year mark and 5 years after it. This entire decade is when the massive hormonal shifts actually occur. So if we're going to understand symptom severity, we have to look at this whole 10-year landscape, not just that single date.
And this overlapping timeline creates a massive double whammy for a lot of women. Because the first 5 years overlap with the tail end of a woman's menstrual cycles, many women assume their intense suffering, the fatigue, the irritability, the physical pain, is purely menopausal. But Dr. Yoshi points out they might actually be experiencing worsening severe PMS, or a super painful overlapping combination of both PMS and climacteric symptoms. Treating one while completely ignoring the other, that's just a recipe for prolonged suffering.
All right, let's get into pillar one, your personality.
Now, it might sound a bit wild that your mind plays such a huge role in a biological process, but the clinical observations here are totally undeniable. The specific psychological profile linked to the absolute worst symptoms includes women who are highly earnest, deeply serious, prone to anxiety, or who just tend to be overthinkers and perfectionists. These women actually report much worse physical and emotional menopausal symptoms. Basically, if you're the kind of person who pours 100% of your energy into one task and worries deeply about others, you're statistically more likely to feel the physical crash of this 10-year window much harder. The clinic staff puts it perfectly. This is absolutely not a character flaw. It's being serious in a good way. These are incredibly responsible, caring individuals. But the inability to relax, or the struggle to just let things go, severely amplifies the biological changes happening in the body. When your mind is completely tense, your body's threshold for managing all that hormonal chaos drops significantly.
Moving right along to pillar 2, estrogen decline.
So the biological decline of the hormone estrogen is the main physical engine driving this entire transition. And how this engine powers down changes everything. Think of your estrogen levels as a landscape. For some women, this decline acts like a steep cliff, a rapid, sudden drop-off. When this happens, the symptoms are violent, right? You get intense hot flashes, severe mood swings, and just deep, deep fatigue. But for other women, the decline is more of a gentle slope. The hormone levels lower gradually, giving the body time to adapt, which makes the 10-year transition far more manageable and the symptoms incredibly mild. To create that highly desired gentle slope, our bodies can sometimes rely on a fascinating compound called equal. Equal is an estrogen-like compound that essentially acts as a biological buffer. When estrogen drops, equal steps in to mimic its effects, smoothing out the whole transition. And where does equal come from? Well, it's produced right in our gut when we metabolize soy products, things like tofu, soy milk, and natto.
Which brings us to a really interesting concept: the equal lottery.
Now, before you rush to the grocery store to eat mountains of tofu in hopes of fixing your estrogen levels, we have to look at a pretty stunning genetic fact. Only about 50% of Japanese women actually have the specific gut bacteria required to break down soy and naturally produce equal. The other 50%, they can eat literally all the tofu in the world, and their bodies simply will not convert it into that helpful symptom-relieving compound. It is quite literally a flip of a coin. Which naturally begs the absolute most important question for your biological toolkit as you enter this decade.
can your body actually produce it? Because if you don't know the answer to this question, you might be relying on a dietary strategy that's doing absolutely nothing to help you build that gentle biological slope.
Fortunately, finding out isn't a guessing game at all. It's actually as simple as a quick urine test available at most gynecology clinics. And knowing your status completely empowers you to make the right choice. If you produce it, great. Adjust your diet to include way more soy. But if you fall into the 50% that cannot produce it, you don't have to suffer. You can just bypass the gut entirely by taking direct Equal supplements, which provide your body with the exact same estrogen buffering benefits.
And finally, let's look at pillar 3, environmental stress. Because, let's be real, this 10-year biological window doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens during one of the most chaotic phases of a woman's life. Right in the middle of this storm, women are simultaneously hit with massive converging environmental stressors. We're talking about children growing up and leaving the home. We're talking about the sudden, heavy burden of caring for aging and ailing parents. Plus, it's a time of major career shifts, taking on bigger leadership roles, or even facing retirement. The external pressure is at an absolute peak just as the internal estrogen levels are dropping.
Dr. Yashi's clinic highlighted a deeply poignant example of this, the emotional void. Think about a mother who has spent decades pouring her love into making daily bento lunchboxes for her kids. Suddenly, the kids move out. That daily rhythm, that really tangible act of purpose, it just vanishes. That sudden loss creates a massive emotional void. And that profound psychological stress makes the physical pain and hormonal shifts of menopause feel infinitely worse.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about solutions and social empathy. Now that we've mapped out how the mind, the body, and the environment all conspire to dictate just how bad this decade can be, let's focus on the light at the end of the tunnel, solutions. Understanding the mechanics is really only half the battle. The key takeaway here is to take actionable medical steps. Stop dismissing your pain as just some natural burden you have to silently bear. Go get tested for equal production. Consult a gynecologist to see if the symptoms are actually overlapping with severe PMS, or if hormone replacement therapy can help you build that gentle slope we talked about. Utilize targeted supplements if your body needs them. And most importantly, recognize the massive mental and environmental burden you're carrying.
But the clinic strongly notes that medicine isn't enough to solve this. Society at large absolutely must evolve. Workplaces need to understand this invisible struggle. Male colleagues, management, and even younger women who just haven't experienced this yet must stop dismissing these 10 years as just being a bit irritable. If an executive is struggling or a mother is grieving her empty nest while battling extreme fatigue, they need genuine empathy and structural support in the workplace and at home, not judgment.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. We now know the profound ways personality, biology, and environment collide to make this 10-year window incredibly difficult for so many women. We have the science, for sure. But do we have the compassion? How can we, whether as partners, colleagues, or friends, really step up to build a truly empathetic society that supports the women in our lives as they navigate this monumental transition? Think about that and what you can do to help change the narrative. Thanks so much for joining me today.